The human toddler touched the dragon's nose. Then he bowed for the first time in centuries. Before we dive into this story, drop a quick hi in the comments and tell me where you're watching from. It really helps support the channel. Amidst the gleaming towers of New Terra Colony, where humanity had carved out its modest presence on the edge of galactic society, a small child named Ethan Walker wandered away from his distracted mother, blissfully unaware that his tiny hands would soon reshape interstellar politics forever. For over 800 years, the Draconis Imperium had ruled the central sectors of the galaxy with unquestioned authority. Their biological form, massive, scaled beings with regenerative capabilities and lifespans measured in millennia, had given them natural advantages that translated into cultural superiority. Their empire spread across 17 star systems, built on technological advancement and the absolute certainty that no lesser species could ever be their equal. The diplomatic summit on New Terra represented the first formal meeting between humans and the Draconis after humanity's recent expansion into the outer sectors. The Terran diplomatic corps had spent months preparing for this moment, desperate to make a positive impression on the ancient empire whose permission they needed to establish trade routes through Draconis territory. Lauren Walker, New Terra's senior xenobiologist and single mother to 3-year-old Ethan, had been specifically requested to attend by the Terran delegates. Her groundbreaking research on interspecies communication made her invaluable, though bringing her son had been a last-minute necessity after her childcare arrangements fell through. The grand meeting hall of the colony's administrative building had been transformed for the occasion. Holographic displays showcased Earth's achievements, carefully selected to impress without appearing threatening. The human delegation stood in formal attire, posture perfect, expressions schooled into masks of respectful attention. Ambassador Ryan Mitchell stepped forward as the massive doors at the far end of the hall began to open. The humans collectively held their breath as the Draconis delegation entered. They moved with surprising grace for beings of such size. The smallest stood 3 meters tall, their scaled bodies rippling with muscle beneath ceremonial garments of metallic thread that caught the light. Their elongated heads featured intelligent eyes set above pronounced snouts and powerful jaws. Though they walked upright on 2 legs, their thick tails provided perfect balance. Most impressive were the vestigial wings folded against their backs, no longer functional for flight, but maintained as symbols of their evolutionary superiority. At the center walked their leader, Grand Sovereign Taliesin, instantly recognizable by his size, nearly 4 meters tall, and the deep crimson of his scales that seemed to absorb rather than reflect light. Ancient even by Draconis standards, Taliesin had personally overseen the subjugation of 3 different species and the annexation of their worlds. For 4 centuries, no being had seen him bow his head to anyone. Lauren stood near the back of the human delegation, one hand firmly holding Ethan's small fingers, whispering for him to be quiet and still, just for a little while. The toddler, normally energetic and curious, seemed momentarily subdued by the grand spectacle unfolding before him. But a 3-year-old's attention span has definite limits. As the formal introductions began and Ambassador Mitchell started his carefully rehearsed greeting, Lauren felt Ethan's hand slip from hers. She reached to recapture it, but the child had already taken 2 steps away, his attention caught by a floating service drone carrying refreshments. "Ethan," she whispered urgently, trying to grab him without creating a scene. Her fingers brushed his shirt, but he moved with the unpredictable speed only toddlers seem to possess. The timing couldn't have been worse. Grand Sovereign Taliesin had just begun his response to the human greeting, his deep voice resonating through the hall without need for amplification. Every human stood perfectly still, aware that the next few minutes would likely determine their species' standing with the powerful empire for generations to come. Every human except one small boy who was now walking directly into the open space between the delegations. Lauren felt her heart stop. Several diplomats noticed Ethan but remained frozen in place, unwilling to create a greater disruption by lunging after him. Security personnel at the edges of the room tensed but awaited orders that didn't come. In the crucial seconds of collective indecision, Ethan Walker crossed the point of no return. The Grand Sovereign's voice faltered mid-sentence as his golden eyes tracked the small human child approaching him with complete fearlessness. The massive being's tail twitched once, a sign of surprise that his advisors hadn't seen in decades. The hall fell into absolute silence. Lauren fought against the paralyzing horror, forcing her legs to move. She had to reach Ethan before, but it was already too late. The toddler had stopped directly in front of Taliesin, his small head tilted all the way back to take in the towering reptilian being before him. Then, with the simple curiosity of childhood, he spoke a single word that echoed in the silent chamber. Dragon. Draconis guards reached for ceremonial weapons. Human security personnel moved forward despite protocol. Ambassador Mitchell looked as though he might faint. But before anyone could intervene, Ethan did something worse than speaking. He reached up with one small hand toward the most powerful being in 17 star systems. Lauren finally broke free from her paralysis and rushed forward, but the distance seemed impossible to cross in time. Her mind filled with terrifying scenarios, interstellar incidents, diplomatic catastrophes, possibly even her child's injury or death if the Draconis perceived a threat. "I'm so sorry, Your Eminence," she called out desperately. "He's just a child. He doesn't understand." But Ethan's tiny fingers had already made contact with the end of Grand Sovereign Taliesin's snout. Time seemed to stop. The Draconis guards froze in shock. The human delegation collectively held their breath. Lauren reached her son and dropped to her knees beside him, one arm protectively around his small body, her eyes raised to meet whatever reaction would come from the towering sovereign. What happened next would change galactic history. Grand Sovereign Taliesin, ruler of 17 star systems, conqueror of 3 civilizations, and undisputed master of the Draconis Imperium, slowly, deliberately, lowered his massive head and bent his long neck in a perfect bow before the small human child. The gesture lasted only seconds, but its significance was unmistakable. No living being had seen the Grand Sovereign bow to another in over 400 years. His own delegation appeared stunned beyond words. When Taliesin straightened, there was something in his ancient eyes that hadn't been there before, a flicker of emotion that none present could quite identify. "Fascinating," he said, his voice softer than before. "In all my centuries, I have never—" He didn't complete the thought. Instead, he turned to Ambassador Mitchell, who looked simultaneously relieved and confused. "We will adjourn for today," Taliesin announced. "I wish to speak with this female and her offspring. Alone." The Draconis delegation immediately backed away, though several cast uncertain glances at their leader. The humans, taking their cue from Ambassador Mitchell's subtle gesture, likewise began to withdraw, though many sent sympathetic looks toward Lauren and Ethan. "Should I stay, Your Eminence?" asked Ambassador Mitchell. "That will not be necessary," Taliesin replied. "This is a matter of personal curiosity." Once the great hall had emptied, leaving only Lauren, Ethan, and the massive draconic being, Taliesin lowered himself to one knee, another unprecedented gesture that brought his head somewhat closer to their level. "Your offspring shows no fear," he said to Lauren. "This is unusual." Lauren found her voice, though it trembled slightly. "He's very young, Your Eminence. Children his age often don't recognize danger the way adults do." "I apologize deeply for the interruption." "Do not apologize," Taliesin said, surprising her. "Tell me, what did he call me?" Lauren hesitated. He called you a dragon. It's a mythical creature from our world's ancient legends. Great reptilian beings, often winged, usually depicted as immensely powerful and wise. Dragons." Taliesin repeated the word, seeming to savor it. "And in these legends, were these dragons feared?" "Often, yes," Lauren admitted carefully. "But in many stories, they were also respected, even revered. Some cultures saw them as divine beings or guardians of great knowledge." Taliesin's eyes shifted to Ethan, who was now partly hidden behind his mother's legs, but still watching the great being with undisguised fascination. "And what do you think of me, small one? Do you fear me now?" Ethan shook his head emphatically. "Why not?" Taliesin pressed, genuine curiosity in his voice. "You're nice," Ethan said simply. "Nice dragon." Something extraordinary happened then. Grand Sovereign Taliesin laughed. The sound rumbled through the empty hall like distant thunder, but there was genuine amusement in it. "How long has it been," he mused, seemingly to himself, "since any being in the galaxy looked upon me and saw something other than terror or calculated advantage?" He refocused on Lauren. "Your designation?" "Dr. Lauren Walker, Your Eminence. I'm a xenobiologist. You study other species." "Yes, I specialize in interspecies communication and cultural exchange." Taliesin nodded slowly. "Then perhaps you can explain something that has puzzled me for centuries. Why do most species cower before the Draconis, yet your offspring shows no fear? Is this common among human young?" Lauren considered her answer carefully. "Children often respond to the unfamiliar with curiosity rather than fear, Your Eminence. Fear is something they learn, usually from their parents' reactions or from painful experiences. So fear is taught, not innate," Taliesin said thoughtfully. "A fascinating concept." He turned his massive head toward Ethan again. "Would you like to see something special, small human?" Ethan nodded eagerly. Taliesin reached into a pocket of his ceremonial robes and withdrew what appeared to be a small crystalline orb. He held it carefully between two clawed fingers, then gently breathed on it. The orb began to glow with an inner light that shifted through colors like an aurora. With a slight gesture of his claws, Taliesin sent the orb floating through the air toward Ethan. The child's eyes widened with delight as the glowing orb bobbed and weaved before him, responding to subtle movements of Taliesin's claws. "It's a toy I created for my own offspring," Taliesin explained to Lauren. "Many centuries ago." "You have children?" Lauren asked, surprised. "Had?" Taliesin corrected, something ancient and sorrowful flickering across his reptilian features. "Our reproductive cycles are separated by millennia. My offspring have long since joined the celestial ancestors." "I'm sorry," Lauren said genuinely. Taliesin acknowledged her sympathy with a slight inclination of his head. "It has been a very long time since I interacted with a juvenile of any species." Ethan laughed as the orb spun and danced before him, trailing rainbow light. After a moment's hesitation, Taliesin extended his massive hand, palm up, toward the child. "Would you like to try?" Without hesitation, and before Lauren could intervene, Ethan placed his tiny hand in the massive scaled palm. The contrast was striking. A small, soft human hand against the ancient, armored scales of a being who had lived for millennia. Taliesin's expression was unreadable as he gently closed his claws around Ethan's hand and guided his movements. The orb responded, swooping and spinning according to the child's gestures. "He has good control," Taliesin observed. "Strong mental focus for one so young." "He's always been quick to learn," Lauren said, watching the interaction with a mixture of professional interest and maternal concern. For several minutes, the strange tableau continued, an ancient draconic sovereign playing with a human toddler, teaching him to control a toy that probably contained technology beyond human understanding. Finally, Taliesin reclaimed the orb and tucked it away. "Your offspring is remarkable," he told Lauren. "Unbound by preconceptions." I had forgotten what that was like. He rose to his full height again, towering over them. "Tomorrow, when our delegations reconvene, I would request that you and your offspring be present." Lauren blinked in surprise. "Of course, Your Eminence, but may I ask why?" Taliesin's expression shifted to something that might have been a smile, though on his reptilian features it was difficult to interpret. "Because, Dr. Walker, I believe your species has something valuable to teach the Draconis, after all. Something we may have forgotten over our long existence." With that cryptic statement, he turned and strode from the hall, leaving Lauren and Ethan alone with the echoing silence and the implications of what had just occurred. "Dragon gone?" Ethan asked, looking up at his mother. "Yes, sweetie," Lauren replied, gathering him into her arms. But we'll see him again tomorrow. As she carried her son from the hall, Lauren's mind raced with questions. What had Taliesin meant? What could humans possibly teach the ancient Draconis? And why had the touch of a child's hand prompted the mighty sovereign to bow for the first time in centuries? She had no answers yet, but one thing was certain. The diplomatic summit had just taken an unexpected turn, and somehow her 3-year-old son was now at the center of it all. Word of the extraordinary encounter spread quickly through both delegations. By evening, Lauren had been summoned to an emergency meeting with Ambassador Mitchell and the senior diplomatic team. Dr. Walker, I need you to explain exactly what happened after we left, Mitchell said, his normally composed demeanor showing signs of strain. Grand Sovereign Taliesin has requested a complete restructuring of tomorrow's agenda, and he specifically requested your presence, yours and your son's. Lauren recounted the interaction as precisely as she could, careful not to omit any details. When she finished, the room fell silent. He bowed to your son, said Natalie Quinn, the chief diplomatic strategist, her voice tinged with disbelief. And then he played with him? Essentially, yes, Lauren confirmed. This is unprecedented, Mitchell said, running a hand through his graying hair. The Draconis are known for their rigid hierarchical structure, for their sovereign to show deference to anyone, let alone a human child. It could be a test, suggested Security Chief Tyler Grant, or some kind of cultural misunderstanding we're not aware of. I don't think so, Lauren said, drawing their attention. I've spent years studying interspecies interactions. What I saw in Taliesin was genuine. He was moved by Ethan's lack of fear. It seemed to remind him of something from his past. He mentioned offspring of his own, Natalie noted. Could that be relevant? Possibly, Lauren agreed. He said it had been centuries since he interacted with juveniles of any species. And he seemed, I don't know how else to put it, lonely. Lonely, Mitchell repeated incredulously. He rules 17 star systems. Power doesn't preclude loneliness, Ambassador, Lauren pointed out, especially for a being who may have outlived everyone he once cared for. The room fell silent as they considered this. Regardless of the reason, Mitchell finally said, we need to capitalize on this unexpected opening. The Draconis rarely grant direct access to their sovereign. If he's taken a personal interest in you and your son, that could significantly advance our diplomatic goals. Lauren felt a surge of protectiveness. My son isn't a diplomatic tool, Ambassador. Of course not, Mitchell backpedaled quickly. But his natural charm has clearly made an impression on Taliesin. All I'm suggesting is that we don't waste this opportunity. What exactly is Taliesin proposing for tomorrow? Natalie asked. Mitchell consulted his tablet. He's requested a tour of our colony, specifically our educational facilities and family residential areas. He wants to observe human children in their natural environment. That's unusual, Lauren said. Unprecedented is more like it, Mitchell replied. The Draconis have never shown interest in the domestic aspects of other species before. They typically focus exclusively on military capability and resource potential. So what do we do? Asked Chief Grant. Mitchell looked at Lauren. Dr. Walker, would you be comfortable allowing Ethan to interact with Taliesin again, under controlled circumstances? Lauren considered the question carefully. As a mother, her first instinct was protective. As a scientist, she was intrigued by the unprecedented cultural exchange taking place. As a citizen of New Terra, she understood the enormous stakes involved in establishing positive relations with the Draconis Imperium. Yes, she finally said. But I'll remain with him at all times, and if I believe at any point that he's uncomfortable or at risk, I reserve the right to remove him from the situation immediately. Agreed, Mitchell said, looking relieved. We'll arrange the tour according to Taliesin's requests, but with appropriate security measures in place. Dr. Walker, given your expertise in interspecies communication, I'd like you to take the lead in explaining our educational and family structures to the sovereign. Lauren nodded, though internally she was already wondering how to explain human concepts of family, childhood, and education to a being who had lived for millennia and came from a completely different biological and cultural background. After the meeting concluded, Lauren returned to their quarters where Ethan was being watched by a colleague. The boy was already asleep, his small face peaceful in the dim light of his bedroom. Lauren sat beside his bed, watching the gentle rise and fall of his chest. Tomorrow, this innocent child would again be in the presence of one of the most powerful beings in the galaxy, a being who, for reasons not yet clear, had shown him unprecedented deference. "What did you see in him, Taliesin?" she whispered. "What did my son awaken in you with his simple touch?" As she prepared for bed herself, Lauren couldn't shake the feeling that they stood at the precipice of something monumental, that the simple, fearless curiosity of a child might accomplish what centuries of formal diplomacy had failed to do. The next morning dawned clear and bright on New Terra. Lauren dressed Ethan with extra care, choosing comfortable clothes that still looked presentable. She tried to explain the importance of the day to him, though much of it went over his 3-year-old head. "Remember the dragon from yesterday?" she asked as she helped him with his shoes. Ethan nodded enthusiastically. "Nice dragon." "Yes, the nice dragon. His name is Taliesin, and he wants to see where you live and play. Can you be on your best behavior today?" "I be good," Ethan promised, though Lauren knew from experience that a toddler's definition of good could be highly variable. They met the diplomatic team at the colony's central plaza. Ambassador Mitchell looked like he hadn't slept, his usual impeccable appearance slightly rumpled. "The Draconis delegation will arrive shortly," he told Lauren. "We've arranged the tour to begin at the primary education center, then proceed to the community recreation area, and finally to the family residential sector. Taliesin has requested minimal formal protocol and reduced security presence." Lauren raised an eyebrow at this. "Is that wise?" "Probably not," Mitchell admitted. "But Chief Grant has arranged discreet security measures that won't be obvious to our guests. We're trying to balance caution with respect for Taliesin's wishes." The distinctive sound of Draconis transport vessels drew their attention skyward. 3 sleek ships descended toward the landing pad adjacent to the plaza, significantly fewer than the impressive fleet that had arrived for the formal welcome the previous day. The central vessel touched down first, its hull shimmering with an iridescent quality that human technology had yet to replicate. The side portal dilated open, and Grand Sovereign Taliesin emerged, flanked by only 2 advisors rather than the full ceremonial guard of the previous day. Taliesin's gaze immediately found Lauren and Ethan in the small welcoming party. He approached them directly, largely ignoring the formal greeting Ambassador Mitchell had begun to deliver. "Good morning, Dr. Walker," Taliesin said, his deep voice pitched lower than it had been during the formal proceedings. "And to you, small human Ethan." To Lauren's surprise, Taliesin lowered himself slightly, not a full bow, but a deliberate reduction of his imposing height. "Hi, Dragon," Ethan replied cheerfully, earning a muffled groan from Mitchell and several wide-eyed looks from other humans present. But Taliesin's reaction was what mattered, and to Lauren's relief, the massive being made that rumbling sound again. Laughter, she now recognized. "I have been called many things across the centuries," Taliesin said, "but dragon may be the most fitting. I am curious to learn more about these legendary creatures from your world. I can arrange access to our cultural databases," Mitchell offered quickly. "Perhaps later," Taliesin said dismissively. "For now, I wish to see how your young develop. It is an aspect of species study the Imperium has traditionally overlooked." The tour began at the Education Center, where children ranging from 5 to 12 years old were engaged in their regular learning activities. The arrival of the towering draconic visitors initially caused a stir, but the children's reactions were markedly different from those of adults. After the initial surprise, their fear quickly gave way to fascination and excited questions. Taliesin observed it all with intense interest, occasionally asking Lauren to explain various aspects of the education system. He seemed particularly intrigued by the creative play areas where younger children engaged in unstructured activities. "They create scenarios from imagination," he noted, watching a group building an elaborate structure from simple blocks. This serves what purpose? It develops creativity, problem-solving skills, and social cooperation, Lauren explained. Play is how human children learn about the world and their place in it. Fascinating, Taliesin said. Draconis hatchlings emerge with instinctual knowledge of their role in society. The concept of discovering one's purpose through experimentation is foreign to us. At the community recreation area, they observed children of various ages engaged in play and sports. Ethan, growing comfortable with the grand tour, tugged at his mother's hand. "I play too?" he asked hopefully. Lauren looked uncertainly at Ambassador Mitchell, who seemed equally unsure how to respond. But before either could decide, Taliesin spoke. "Yes, small human. Show me how you play." With permission granted, Ethan happily ran toward a group of children playing with a ball in a grassy area. Lauren watched nervously as her son approached the group, was readily accepted, and joined their simple game of rolling the ball back and forth. "Your species integrates offspring of different ages," Taliesin observed. "The older ones adjust their behavior to accommodate the younger." "Yes," Lauren confirmed. "Learning to interact with people of different abilities and developmental stages is an important part of human socialization. In Draconis society, hatchlings are segregated by clutch age until maturity," one of Taliesin's advisors explained. "It promotes consistency in development and reduces resource competition. An efficient system," Lauren acknowledged diplomatically, "though our approach emphasizes adaptability and diverse social experiences." "Adaptability," Taliesin repeated thoughtfully. "Yes, this has been noted as a human characteristic. Your species lacks many physical advantages but compensates through behavioral flexibility." The group watched as Ethan, having misunderstood the rules of the game, picked up the ball instead of rolling it. Rather than correcting him harshly, the older children simply adjusted their play to incorporate his variation. "See how they adapt to his misunderstanding?" Lauren pointed out. Rather than enforcing rigid compliance, they modify the activity to include him at his level. "Inefficient," murmured one of Taliesin's advisors. "Perhaps," Taliesin responded, surprising his own delegation. "Or perhaps there is wisdom in such flexibility that we have forgotten." They continued to the residential area, where Taliesin requested to see Lauren and Ethan's home. This unprecedented request caused Mitchell visible discomfort, but he could hardly refuse. Lauren's quarters were modest but comfortable, a two-bedroom unit with a combined living and dining area, simply furnished but made homey with personal touches. Ethan immediately ran to show Taliesin his favorite toys, completely at ease with the massive being who had to duck to enter the dwelling. "This is where you nest?" Taliesin asked, surveying the apartment. "We call it home, but yes," Lauren said. "It's standard housing for a small family in the colony." "And the male parent?" Taliesin inquired, noting the absence of evidence of another adult. "It's just Ethan and me," Lauren explained, keeping her tone neutral. "Human family structures are diverse. Some have two parents, some have one, some have extended family groups." Taliesin seemed to consider this information carefully. Among the Draconis, offspring are raised communally by designated caretakers after hatching. Biological parents provide genetic material but rarely participate in rearing. "That's not uncommon in various Earth species as well," Lauren noted. "Different reproductive and care strategies evolve based on many factors. Yet you alone care for your offspring," Taliesin observed. "This requires significant resource expenditure from a single provider." "It can be challenging," Lauren admitted. "But the emotional bond compensates for the practical difficulties." "Emotional bond," Taliesin repeated, as if testing an unfamiliar concept. His gaze shifted to Ethan, who was now showing him a toy spacecraft with enthusiastic sound effects. "You feel connection to this specific offspring beyond biological imperative?" The question struck Lauren as both strange and profound. "Of course. I love him. He's everything to me." Taliesin's expression changed subtly, a slight softening around his ancient eyes. "Long ago, before the Imperium expanded beyond our home world, Draconis lived in smaller family groups. Parents and offspring remained together for many cycles. This practice was deemed inefficient during our expansion era and gradually eliminated. He watched Ethan play for a moment longer, then added, "I sometimes wonder what we sacrificed for efficiency." The comment hung in the air, surprisingly vulnerable from a being of such power and age. Lauren sensed that something significant was happening, some internal shift in Taliesin's perspective that could have far-reaching implications. The moment was interrupted when Ethan, apparently deciding that Taliesin had been serious enough, thrust a plush toy into the Sovereign's massive clawed hand. "For Dragon," he declared. "Present." The toy was a small stuffed creature, ironically, a dragon from Earth mythology, with rainbow-colored scales and a friendly embroidered smile. Lauren had bought it for him at the colony's market, never imagining it would one day be offered to an actual draconic alien sovereign. For a moment, everyone in the room froze. Ambassador Mitchell looked positively ill. Taliesin's advisors tensed visibly. Even Lauren held her breath, uncertain how the mighty sovereign would react to being offered a child's toy. Taliesin examined the plush dragon with utmost seriousness, turning it over in his claws as if it were a priceless artifact or complex technology. "This resembles your concept of dragon?" he finally asked. "A children's version," Lauren explained hastily. "Simplified and made friendly." "I see," Taliesin said. Then, to everyone's astonishment, he carefully tucked the toy into a pocket of his ceremonial robes. "I accept this diplomatic token with appropriate gravity." Was that humor in his voice? Lauren wasn't entirely sure, but she thought she detected a glint of amusement in the ancient being's eyes. "Perhaps," Taliesin continued, straightening to his full height, which nearly reached the ceiling of the apartment, "it is time to discuss the true purpose of my interest in your offspring and your child-rearing practices." The mood in the room shifted instantly. Ambassador Mitchell stepped forward, clearly ready to engage in formal diplomatic exchange now that the unusual tour had concluded. "The Terran Alliance is eager to establish mutually beneficial relations with the Draconis Imperium," Mitchell began, falling back on practiced diplomatic phrases. Taliesin silenced him with a gesture. "I am not addressing you, Ambassador. My words are for Dr. Walker." Mitchell stepped back, unable to hide his confusion. Lauren found herself the focus of Taliesin's intense golden gaze. "For millennia, the Draconis have valued strength, efficiency, and order above all else," Taliesin said. "These principles built our Imperium and maintained our dominance across 17 star systems. But in recent centuries, I have observed troubling patterns in our development." He began to pace the small apartment, forcing everyone to adjust their positions to accommodate his massive form. "Our technological advancement has slowed. Our artistic and cultural evolution has stagnated. Our population growth has declined despite abundant resources. These are symptoms of a deeper malady, one I could identify but not name, until yesterday." He stopped and looked directly at Ethan, who had returned to playing with his toys, oblivious to the gravity of the conversation taking place. "Your offspring approached me without fear or preconception. He saw not the grand sovereign of the Draconis Imperium, but simply a dragon, a being worthy of interest rather than terror. His touch contained no calculation, no agenda, no awareness of power dynamics. When was the last time any being approached me so?" The question seemed rhetorical, but Lauren answered anyway. "Children see the world differently. They haven't yet learned all the social constructs and prejudices that adults carry." "Precisely," Taliesin said, sounding pleased with her response. "And therein lies what the Draconis have lost. In our pursuit of imperial efficiency, we eliminated the unpredictable, the spontaneous, the creative. We engineered our society to produce perfect Draconis citizens, and in doing so, we may have engineered our own stagnation." His advisors shifted uncomfortably, clearly disturbed by their sovereign's words, but unwilling to contradict him. "What are you suggesting, Your Eminence?" Lauren asked carefully. "I am suggesting, Dr. Walker, that the Draconis Imperium has much to learn from humanity, particularly from your approach to offspring development. The very qualities we have bred out of our species, curiosity, creativity, emotional connection, may be essential for our continued evolution. He turned to Ambassador Mitchell, who appeared stunned by this unexpected turn. Ambassador, I propose an exchange program. I wish to establish a cultural and educational mission on New Terra, staffed by selected Draconis scholars who will study human child development and family structures. In exchange, we will provide technological assistance and open our trading routes to human vessels. Mitchell's diplomatic training barely kept his shock from showing. That is an extremely generous proposal, Your Eminence. The Terran Alliance would be honored too. Furthermore, Taliesin continued, I would request that Dr. Walker serve as the scientific director of this program. Given her expertise in interspecies communication and her personal demonstration of human parenting practices. Now it was Lauren's turn to be shocked. Me? But I'm just a colony xenobiologist. Surely there are more qualified. You understand both the scientific principles and the emotional components, Taliesin interrupted. And your offspring has already proven his ability to communicate effectively with Draconis. He said this last part with what Lauren was increasingly certain was dry humor, another unexpected quality in the ancient sovereign. Ambassador Mitchell, quickly recovering from his surprise, recognized the extraordinary diplomatic opportunity being presented. Dr. Walker would be an excellent choice, he agreed enthusiastically. We can begin making arrangements immediately. Good, Taliesin said with finality. The details can be established by our respective administrative staff. For now, I have seen what I needed to see. He looked down at Ethan once more. The boy, sensing the attention, looked up from his toys and gave the sovereign a bright smile. Bye-bye, dragon, he asked, somehow understanding that the visit was concluding. For now, small human, Taliesin replied. But I shall return. There is much your species can teach mine. With that, he gave Ethan a formal nod, not the full bow of the previous day, but still a gesture of respect that sent ripples of astonishment through his advisors, and departed with his delegation. In the stunned silence that followed, Ambassador Mitchell turned to Lauren with wide eyes. Do you realize what just happened? The most powerful empire in known space just offered us open trade routes and technological exchange because your son gave their sovereign a stuffed toy. Lauren looked down at Ethan, who had already returned to playing, unaware that he had just helped reshape interstellar politics. Sometimes the simplest gestures have the most profound effects, she said softly. Over the following months, the cultural exchange program took shape with remarkable speed, especially considering the typically slow pace of Draconis administrative processes. A compound was established near the colony's education center, where a carefully selected group of Draconis scholars, specialists in various scientific and cultural disciplines, took up residence to study human family and educational practices. Lauren found herself in the unexpected position of directing this unprecedented program, serving as the bridge between two vastly different species. The work was challenging but deeply rewarding, particularly as she observed the gradual changes in the Draconis participants. At first, they approached human child-rearing practices with clinical detachment, meticulously documenting observations without emotional engagement. But as weeks passed, something began to shift. The Draconis scholars started to display genuine curiosity rather than merely dutiful study. They asked questions that went beyond data collection, seeking to understand the why behind human behaviors, not just the what. Most remarkable was their interaction with the colony's children. Initially, the massive reptilian beings had terrified most of the young humans. But children adapt quickly, and fear soon gave way to fascination. The Draconis, for their part, gradually learned to modulate their imposing presence, lowering themselves physically, softening their naturally resonant voices, and responding to the children's endless questions with increasing patience. Ethan, of course, had never shown fear of the dragons and became something of a mascot for the program. The Draconis scholars seemed particularly drawn to him, perhaps because of his connection to Taliesin, or perhaps simply because his fearless curiosity embodied exactly what they had come to study. 3 months into the program, Grand Sovereign Taliesin returned to New Terra for a progress assessment. The diplomatic fanfare was significantly reduced this time, as Taliesin had specifically requested a more informal visit focused on the exchange program. Lauren met him at the compound, Ethan by her side. The boy immediately recognized Taliesin and waved enthusiastically. "Dragon back," he announced happily. Taliesin's massive head inclined in acknowledgement. "Indeed, small human. I have returned as promised." Lauren noticed something different about the sovereign. His posture seemed less rigid, his movements more fluid. Even his voice carried a different quality, still deep and powerful, but with subtle modulations that hadn't been present before. "The program appears to be proceeding well," Taliesin observed as Lauren guided him through the compound. "My scholars report fascinating findings." "They've been excellent participants," Lauren confirmed. "Very thorough in their observations and increasingly insightful in their questions." They watched as a group of human children engaged in an art activity under the guidance of one of the Draconis scholars. The massive being was carefully demonstrating how to mix colors, his enormous clawed hands somehow managing to manipulate the small brushes without breaking them. "Soverax was our leading physicist," Taliesin noted, indicating the Draconis teaching art. "He requested reassignment to cultural studies 2 weeks ago. Is that unusual?" Lauren asked. "Unprecedented," Taliesin replied. Draconis typically maintain their specialized focus for their entire careers. Changing disciplines was not done. "He seems to be enjoying the new role," Lauren observed. "Enjoyment," Taliesin repeated thoughtfully. "Another concept we had largely engineered out of our society. Efficiency rarely accommodates enjoyment." They continued their tour, with Ethan occasionally running ahead to greet the Draconis scholars he had come to know over the previous months. Each one acknowledged him with surprising gentleness, some even producing small objects or effects to amuse him: floating lights, harmless energy patterns, or small mechanical curiosities. "They've developed personal relationships with the children," Taliesin noted. "This was not part of their research parameters." "Human children have that effect," Lauren said. "They don't respect research parameters." Taliesin made that now familiar rumbling sound of amusement. "Indeed, an admirable quality, in retrospect." They came to a small garden area where one of the Draconis was seated on the ground, an awkward position for their physiology, surrounded by 5 young children who were showing him different plants and insects they had collected. "Remarkable," Taliesin said softly. "Kelvinar was our most decorated military strategist before volunteering for this mission. I have known him for 7 centuries and never once saw him seated on the ground." "The children probably asked him to," Lauren explained. "They wouldn't understand why he couldn't join their level. And so he adapted," Taliesin said, "as your species always does." They completed the tour in Lauren's office, where Ethan settled with a digital drawing pad while the adults talked. Taliesin seemed particularly interested in the artwork covering one wall, drawings made by colony children, including several depicting the Draconis visitors. In the children's simple artwork, the massive reptilian beings were portrayed not as fearsome aliens, but as friendly, colorful companions, often shown holding hands with small human figures. "I wish to show you something, Dr. Walker," Taliesin said after studying the drawings. He reached into his robes and withdrew a small device, which projected a holographic image when activated. The image showed a vast chamber unlike anything Lauren had seen in the limited glimpses of Draconis architecture from their vessels. Where typical Draconis design favored angular precision and utilitarian simplicity, this space featured curved walls, organic forms, and what appeared to be decorative elements without obvious function. "This is the new hatchling development center being constructed on our homeworld," Taliesin explained. "The first of its kind in over 5 centuries. It incorporates principles observed from your educational facilities." Lauren studied the image with growing amazement. "You're changing your child-rearing practices based on human models?" "We are experimenting," Taliesin corrected. a controlled implementation of selected human approaches, adapted to Draconis biology and culture. The next clutch of hatchlings will be raised with greater emphasis on creative exploration, emotional development, and parental bonding. The implications were staggering. The Draconis, an ancient species whose civilization had remained largely unchanged for millennia, were voluntarily adopting human practices they would have dismissed as primitive and inefficient just months ago. May I ask what prompted this significant change? Lauren inquired carefully. Taliesin was silent for a moment, his ancient gaze distant. The Draconis Imperium has existed for 9,000 years, he finally said. I have ruled for nearly 1,000 of those years. In that time, I have witnessed the rise and fall of dozens of species across the galaxy. Some destroyed themselves through warfare or environmental catastrophe. Others were conquered or assimilated. But the most common pattern of species decline is subtler, a gradual ossification of culture, a slow surrender to comfortable stagnation. He focused on Ethan, who was contentedly drawing, unaware of the profound conversation taking place. I recognized the pattern in my own species centuries ago, but could not identify the solution. Our traditional approaches, technological advancement, territorial expansion, resource acquisition, no longer produced meaningful progress. We had reached a plateau, and I feared we would begin the long decline I had witnessed in so many others. And now, Lauren prompted when Taliesin fell silent. Now I have hope, he said simply. Your species, despite its physical limitations and brief individual lifespans, possesses something the Draconis had sacrificed generations ago, the capacity for genuine innovation, for seeing beyond established patterns, for imagining what has never been rather than perfecting what already exists. He gestured toward Ethan. Your offspring demonstrated this quality when he approached me without preconception. He saw possibilities where others saw only established realities. This is the quality that defines your species, and the quality my own must reclaim if we are to continue our evolution. Lauren was momentarily speechless, struck by the profound nature of the sovereign's insight and the humility it must have required for a being of his age and power to recognize such a fundamental truth. There will be resistance among my people, Taliesin continued. Many will see these changes as threatening or unnecessary. But as sovereign, I must consider not just our present stability, but our future viability. Sometimes preservation requires transformation. It's a courageous position, Lawrence said. Courage, Taliesin repeated thoughtfully. Another quality we had begun to forget. When one has overwhelming power for too long, courage becomes unnecessary, or so we believed. He rose to his full height, signaling the end of their conversation. I must return to the homeworld to oversee the implementation of these initial changes. The exchange program will continue and expand. Your role remains essential, Dr. Walker. I'm honored to contribute, Lauren said sincerely. Taliesin moved toward the door, but paused to look back at Ethan. May I? He asked, gesturing toward the child. Lauren nodded, curious what the sovereign intended. Taliesin approached Ethan and lowered himself to one knee, a now familiar gesture that still carried profound significance given his status. Small human, he said softly. Ethan looked up from his drawing. Hi, dragon. I must depart, Taliesin told him. But I wish to show you something first. He reached into his robes and produced the rainbow-colored plush dragon Ethan had given him months earlier. The toy looked tiny in his massive clawed hand. I have kept your gift, Taliesin said with surprising gentleness. It resides in my personal chambers on the homeworld, where no other being has been permitted to enter for centuries. Ethan smiled, pleased but not particularly surprised, as children often aren't by things adults find remarkable. You need it, the boy said with the simple certainty of a child. To remember. Yes, Taliesin agreed, appearing genuinely moved. To remember what we once were, and what we might become again. With that, he carefully returned the toy to his robes, rose to his feet, and departed with a formal nod to Lauren. As news of the unprecedented changes in Draconis society spread throughout the galaxy, many species watched with a mixture of hope and trepidation. The Imperium had been a dominating, often intimidating presence for millennia. The notion that it might evolve into something different, something potentially more collaborative and creative, represented a seismic shift in galactic politics. For the human colony on New Terra, the changes brought immediate and tangible benefits. Trade routes previously closed to human vessels were opened. Technological exchanges enriched both societies. The cultural mission expanded into other areas of mutual interest. But for Lauren Walker, the most profound outcomes were the ones she observed on a personal level. The Draconis scholars assigned to the exchange program underwent remarkable transformations. Beings who had once approached every task with rigid precision and emotionless efficiency gradually discovered or remembered capacities for curiosity, wonder, and even joy. They formed genuine connections with the humans they studied, particularly the children, whose uninhibited approach to life seemed to awaken something long dormant in the ancient species. 6 months after Taliesin's second visit, Lauren received a secure communication from the Draconis homeworld. It contained only a brief message and an attached image file. The message read, "The first clutch raised under the new protocols has completed initial development. Thought you might appreciate seeing the results." The image showed a group of Draconis hatchlings, smaller versions of the adults, but with brighter scaling and more animated expressions. They were engaged in what appeared to be free play, building elaborate structures from materials that shifted and reformed according to their manipulations. But what caught Lauren's attention most was the adult Draconis in the image, none other than Grand Sovereign Taliesin himself, seated on the floor among the hatchlings, his massive form hunched forward with what could only be described as genuine interest as he participated in their creative activity. And just visible at the edge of the image, placed on a special pedestal where all the hatchlings could see it, was a small, rainbow-colored plush dragon from Earth. Lauren showed the image to Ethan, who had recently turned 4 and was beginning to better understand the significance of his interaction with the dragon. "Dragon happy now?" Ethan observed simply, pointing to Taliesin in the image. "Yes," Lauren agreed. "I think he is." In the decades that followed, the relationship between humans and the Draconis Imperium evolved in ways no diplomatic expert could have predicted. The exchange of ideas and practices flowed in both directions, enriching both societies. The Imperium gradually shifted from an expansionist empire to a collaborative federation, maintaining its strength while developing new capacities for innovation and adaptation. Historians would later mark the moment when a human toddler fearlessly touched the nose of an ancient draconic sovereign as the turning point. The instant when two vastly different species recognized in each other not alien otherness, but complementary strengths. And in the great hall of the Draconis sovereign on their homeworld, where for millennia visitors had been received with intimidating formality, a new tradition emerged. Each new clutch of hatchlings was brought before the Grand Sovereign, who would bow to them, a gesture commemorating the moment when an ancient being rediscovered humility through the fearless touch of a child. And that was the end of the story. If you listened all the way to here, don't forget to leave feedback about what you thought of the story in the comments, whether positive or negative. Your feedback helps us improve. Also, leave your like and subscribe to the channel for more stories like this one. And I'll leave here on the screen another video that I'm sure you'll like. Big hug, and see you in the next story.